So, you all love DreamWorks, right? I mean, how can you not? It's probably one of the most popular film industries at this point, as we live in a post-Puss in Boots 2 era. I think it's safe to say that DreamWorks has become one of the most respected animated film companies now. Illumination prides their work to making dumb baby movies, unless it's the Mario movie, which I still haven't seen yet. Disney prides themselves on making continuous live-action remakes that are detrimental to the animation industry every time somebody with a Disney Plus account sneezes. Well, fuck. And Pixar prides themselves on making generally average movies nowadays and definitely lost their magic. But DreamWorks has only seemed to get better and better as they continue to make true art. They continue to care about the craft of filmmaking and create innovative and awe-inspiring animated films. They've pretty much always been like this. From Shrek to Kung Fu Panda to, if you've all paid attention to the title of this video, How to Train Your Dragon. How to Train Your Dragon still continues to be my favorite trilogy out of any movie trilogy. I've already went into great lengths about how the first movie is a masterpiece in my mind, but what about the others? The second How to Train Your Dragon is, in my opinion, the perfect sequel. DreamWorks is the absolute king of making sequels. But what exactly makes a perfect sequel? Well, I believe that there are 3 core parts to making a good sequel. First off, you need to expand on the universe. Expanding on a universe doesn't necessarily mean exploring new areas, but to build lore to a pre-established world. There needs to be something added to what is already established to create more depth and immerse the audience further before adding new elements. But even adding new elements can be tricky, as it needs to feel natural or make sense that this will just now come up in a movie rather than the first one. Shrek is a great example of this, as it establishes Fiona's family before exploring more Far, Far Away and the fairy godmother, and it keeps building more lore to the world as the film continues. The next thing you need is to continue your themes. Organically progress the theme or the core message of the movie from one movie to the next. Our next example is Kung Fu Panda. The second movie continues its theme of identity by exploring Po's childhood. It sets up his tragic childhood to give this identity crisis where he needs to figure out who he is as a person. Whereas in the first movie, he wanted to get away from being himself and wanted to become one of the Furious Five. However, after he learns that he's worthy of being himself, his new goal is to figure out who exactly that is. The last thing is to leave an impact. This is by far the most important thing you need for a sequel, because if you don't leave a mark on your movie, then what's the point of making it at all? Leave something in your film that will last and continue on to your future film. Going back to Kung Fu Panda, the third movie naturally picks up where the second movie left off by introducing the rest of the surviving pandas after Po had come to terms with his past and his family of pandas. These are all the main factors to make an amazing sequel, and DreamWorks has proven time and time again to do just that. That being said, How to Train Your Dragon 2 is the perfect sequel. It expands upon the universe by introducing the alpha of the dragons, along with the idea behind more dragon hunters and the secret layer of dragons. It organically continues its themes by having a time skip from the first movie, showing us how the life of Vikings has truly changed through Hiccup's influence. And it leaves a long-lasting impact on the franchise as the third movie builds off the rest of the dragons following Toothless as the alpha dragon. Not only that, but the safety of dragonkind is put into question since Bark had to relocate several times due to Drago's influence on the Vikings. This movie did a wonderful job at organically continuing from the first film. Like I've said, there's a huge time skip of 5 years, which is such a genius idea. We get to see how gradual the change was once Vikings got used to dragons and built Bark around the coexistence of dragons and Vikings. What I also love is just how much these characters have grown within the past 5 years. Hiccup is the biggest example of this as he become more mature and independent while still making mistakes now and again. Stoic is obviously more cheerful and sympathetic, who learned to loosen up after connecting with his son further. This is evident by when he reunites with Valka for the first time in decades. The old Stoic would have acted exactly how Valka said he would.
I know what you're gonna say, Stoic. How could I have done this? Stayed away all of these years, and why didn't I come back to you? Oh, stop being so stoic. Go on. Shout, scream, say something!
You're as beautiful as the day I lost you.
But this isn't the same Stoic. This is a man who stopped focusing on being a leader and more about being a father. This is why the time skip is so important. To focus on the changes that Hiccup has made, which becomes thematically important as Hiccup's peacekeeping is put into question several times throughout the movie. We've seen how Hiccup has changed people's opinions on dragons over the past 5 years, so now we can see the challenges that come with this approach. Speaking of Hiccup, his character has naturally progressed in this movie from the first one. He now has to think about who he is now that he's come to have an identity in the eyes of Vikings. His ideology was now being recognized when it was pushed aside in the first film, and seeing him have to choose between being a peacekeeper or be a chief like Stoic was so interesting and organic way to progress his character. This is evident by the discovery of Drago Bloodfist and the conflict between Hiccup and the still existing dragon hunters. Drago works as a sequel villain because he is Hiccup's polar opposite. Hiccup has proven to Vikings that dragons can coexist and live in peace. Drago, however, does exist amongst dragons, but he's not living with them in peace. He finds them as something that needs to be controlled, rather than something that needs to be killed or live in peace with. And seeing him try to convince Drago otherwise, only for his attempts to lead to one of the most horrific moments in his life, is what the sequel needed to mature Hiccup and see that maybe some people truly can't be convinced. That it's not about forcing those to see your way, but to instead protect the ones closest to you. To protect your own. This is 100% without a doubt a perfect sequel, and has every right to be loved by many. That being said, this is week of the both 1 and 3. Okay, look, listen. Let me clarify. This is not a bad movie. This is still a great movie that I really love that I just believe isn't good as 1 and 3. I have significantly more problems with this movie than the first movie. It's not a lot to make me dislike the movie, but it's enough where it's too noticeable for me to ignore. Okay, so I'm gonna get this one out of the way so I don't have to bring it up when I have to make my How to Train Your Dragon 3 video. The Viking geeks suck. They suck in all 3 movies, and they're an attempt for the movie to make jokes to keep the kids entertained. That's something that exists in all 3 movies, and we can just leave it at that so we can move on to bigger problems. Another huge thing that I noticed about this movie is just the general pacing. In the first movie, the pacing was absolutely perfect. It utilized switching what Hiccup was doing between dragon training and dragon training perfectly to strengthen his influence over Burke. Here though, I don't know, something about the pacing was very odd to me. Like, when we meet Valka, we keep switching between Hiccup reconnecting with Valka to the Viking geeks fighting off Drago. Both of these stories don't mesh well together, where the movie can feel significantly longer than what it is. Not saying that anything should have been cut, but I think less back and forth between the two would have made the movie flow more nicely. This was even more noticeable in how short the reunion between Valka and Stoic felt. Pretty much the scene after they had dinner was when the battle between Vikings and Drago began, and it felt like we didn't get enough time between Valka and Stoic reconnecting. Which brings me to probably the biggest issue with this movie. Valka really wasn't set up that well. For a reveal that was supposed to change the status quo for the franchise and in Hiccup's life, I don't get the sense that it was as huge as it seems, because there really wasn't enough time to explore what he was like. I didn't expect him to go more into Valka in the first movie, not at all. It would have made the toxic relationship between Stoic and Hiccup not as effective and would have made it feel more like father and son than they realistically were at the time. But I would have liked at least something in the second movie. Or even some type of conversation in the first movie between Gaba and Stoic about his grief over Valka than Stoic and Hiccup. When I got to this reveal, I couldn't really feel anything because I don't know anything about her. As much as I like the start of the movie showing us what life was 5 years after, I wish we would have spent more time with Hiccup and Stoic talking about Valka and what she would want after Hiccup was avoiding becoming chief. The conversation about Hiccup's future would have naturally brought up Valka, but that never seemed to happen. The only mention of Valka was when...
Four-headed, just like his mother. Aye, she could never stay put either.
And that was after the reveal. A part of me feels a little cheated. All we need was at least some mentioning of her or what she was like in the first and second movie that would have made this reveal matter more to the audience, and I'm kind of disappointed we never got that. And it sucks because every scene Valka was in was beautiful. Some of my favorite scenes in this movie come from Valka interacting with Stoic and Hiccup. Their dynamic feels so natural as Hiccup and Stoic don't know how to react to this revelation. They all feel distant from one another, making their slow growth of becoming a family again feel organic. There's obvious hesitation between all of them. Valka jumps away at chances of Stoic being affectionate, and it's great. The slow burn of Stoic and Valka falling in love with one another is astounding, which makes me all the more upset that this wasn't built up better. Which, if I'm gonna be honest, is a reoccurring issue with this movie.
You know exactly who you are, you always have, but I'm still looking. I know that I'm not my father, and I never met my mother, so what does that make me?
Hiccup's identity crisis is both one of the strongest and surprisingly one of the weakest things in this movie. It feels like a natural continuation of his character from the first movie for sure, now that he has to try and find out if he wants to be a chief of all Vikings or protector of dragons. His interactions with Drago strengthen this arc exponentially as he constantly fails at trying to be a peacekeeper that he wants to be. It makes him begin to question on who exactly he needs to be versus who he wants to be. However, there feels to be something missing from all of this. I think that they did a good job at building up to Hiccup's answer on who he is, with Valka, Stoic, and Drago all challenging his question. Valka claiming that he is a dragon master at heart, while Stoic is trying to talk to him into being the chief of the Vikings, and Drago threatening his peacekeeper ideals. The thing is though, I get the strongest feeling that this arc wasn't concluded effectively. Not to say that it wasn't concluded at all, the movie made it clear that he protects his own, that being both dragons and Vikings, instead of having to choose between the two. However, there is one huge thing missing from this arc.
Son! Dad!
May the Valkyries welcome you and lead you through Odin's great battlefield. May they sing your name with love and fury, so that we might hear it rise from the depths of Valhalla, and know that you've taken your rightful place at the table of kings.
Stoic's death is heartbreaking in every sense. The aftermath, seeing Hiccup irrationally act out of anger and sadness, is extremely well done. The funeral scene is well directed and masterfully crafted. His death is impactful for sure, and they did justice for the character. But there's something missing from Hiccup's reaction to all of this. Okay, so now I'm gonna go on weird tangent, but trust me, this has a point to all of it. So in Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow's death is one of the most important moments in the entire game and quite possibly in Sonic history. It not only perfectly concluded his arc, but it's also heartbreaking to see someone sacrifice themselves for a planet that they never got to experience. What makes his death matter so much is what comes after though. Every character talks about their feelings from what transpired the entire game, and we all get this nice conclusion. Even Sonic, someone who is known for pushing his feelings aside for the sake of others, voices his own form of grief at this loss. He had barely even known Shadow, and yet he sacrificed everything to save him along with Earth. The main takeaway from all of this is vulnerability. Allow your characters to mourn. What makes Shadow's death work is that every character is vulnerable, even someone like Sonic and Eggman. And it's due to the meaning behind this sacrifice that allowed all these characters a chance to grieve or reflect. This is something that I don't think the second How to Train Your Dragon did well. Hiccup hardly even seems fazed by this situation. It's almost like he doesn't even fully grasp what just happened. Hiccup's stubbornness at wanting to be a peacekeeper can be seen as the result of Stoic's death. I was really waiting for Hiccup to fully understand his faults and break down blaming himself for Stoic's death, but that time never came. That single moment of self-deprecation is what I felt like his arc needed that wouldn't even be out of character for him. He's known for blaming himself for tons of other things, so why not when his actions lead to the death of his father? Let your characters be vulnerable. That is something that is vital to a death scene as important as this. However, I never felt like vulnerability ever came from Hiccup. This is what could have made Hiccup question himself further on if being a peacekeeper is what Burke needed. Instead, there's only hints of this self-doubt. There's never a definitive show of vulnerability from Hiccup where he blames himself for Stoic's death, wanting to drive even further away from his initial ideology on peace. I wish there was just a single scene, a single sign where Hiccup lashes out and blames himself. That would have made for such a strong conversation where Valka comforts him and says that if it wasn't for his pacifistic nature, Burke wouldn't be what it is today. This would have made the scene where Hiccup convinces Toothless to come back to him significantly more effective. Instead, we only get mere hints of this growth, where the audience can figure it out for themselves this growth, but nothing definitive from the movie itself. Don't get me wrong, it's still effective, but I think that Hiccup's lack of real emotion for Stoic's death is what pushes this movie further back from being the masterpiece that I wanted it to be. It was a nice build-up for Hiccup's arc, but I can't help but feel robbed that the conclusion to this arc wasn't as strong as it could have been. I have spent a lot of time discussing all of my problems with this movie. So does this mean that I think this movie is bad? No. As I've said in the beginning, this is not a bad movie. The characters are still fantastic as always, the continuing theme of this movie from the first is still well done, and all the action set pieces is visceral, that I would say is even better than the first movie. This movie does so many things right, there are just these small things I've noticed that gradually added up over time. That being said, I love this movie. Drago is a great villain that acts as a perfect foil to Hiccup's ideology. The movie has a perfect mix of action, tender moments, and just pure fun with more lightheartedness to this movie than the first. There's a lot of weight taken off from the first movie due to Burke's progressive society, while still keeping that mature storytelling that never feels sidelined by the less darker tones of the movie. It is also a nice, fun addition. His change from an antagonist to a hero feels natural, who never overstayed his welcome. I'm glad we got someone like Eric because he is infinitely better than the Viking geeks. And as always, Hiccup and Asta's relationship is wholesome and sweet. This is by all means not a terrible movie. but it could have been better. How to Train Your Dragon is one of the most consistent franchises that I've seen. I've hardly seen a franchise with this much consistent storytelling, characters, pacing, and beauty. I consider this the weakest of the trilogy, and I still think it's a good movie. I just have a lot of problems with it, and don't consider it the masterpiece like I do with the other two. I think there was just a lot of ambition on this movie. While this movie did an amazing job at handling these larger scale concepts beyond the Dragon World, along with more mature themes and storytelling than the first, there were just a few things that needed to be refined. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is still an exceptional film that is a fan favorite of mine. It was just a few steps away from being probably my favorite of the franchise. And that is why I am giving this movie a 7.5 out of 10. Thank you all so much for watching. I know I'm really late on this video. I've been kind of having a writer's block. I'll try to get out videos faster in the future, but I was just kind of in a limbo state for a while, so hopefully you can understand. But if you liked the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and hit the little notification bell so you can notify when future content releases. Be sure to check out my Patreon, where you can be a true Animaniac for $6 a month, where you can get access to videos early, a Patreon exclusive Discord where you can freely express yourself amongst me and others, along with other very special benefits. I'm your favorite vegetable cabbage boy, signing off.